right. Well, hello and welcome to the Grace Hour Show, a Christian program that takes a dive into our daily challenges and helps us learn our faith in a practical way. My name is Liz Roobins, and I'm joined today with my usual co-host, Roger Robbins, and we are joined by our special guest today. We have Megan Ackerman with us here. And just a quick introduction for Meg before we dive into the topic. Meg is actually graduated the same year as you from MBC&S, 2007. So you guys were classmates. She's married to Brian. They've been married almost 14 years. You guys have 4 kids, ages 11, 9, 6, and 3. Little Noelle. And you are graduating this May with a master's in biblical counseling, which is really exciting. She was our Greater Grace Children's Ministry Coordinator for 4 years and recently started working as a mental health biblical counselor with a group practice here in Maryland, Mid-Atlantic Mental Health. And you also offer your services here at our church and at GGCA as a volunteer. So we're really excited to have you.
Thank you.
Because we got a really important topic today. Raj, why don't you introduce that?
Well, the whole week is very important. It's on mental health. Today we're going to focus on parents and family and specifically kids. But through the week, you have to tune in because really I think it's going to develop into a real manual to navigate for us believers here in America and abroad. And I think also speaking to our abroad audience, we came back from Budapest last week, and I sent the director and manager of the show, Sebastian, and his team, like pictures of people that have been listening from Romania and Russia and Lithuania and
Czech Republic.
So many families, moms and dads, young adults.
Special greetings to our global audience today. So happy you're here.
So for around the world, this topic this week, we're gonna by the Lord's grace and mercy spearhead it. So just to kind of bring this into focus, mental health. We when we think about it, there's two ways we could separate it, and it would be the teachings of the world and the way of the world, the culture of the world, and its worldview versus our worldview or our biblical view or the view of Christ as he sees mental health and as he sees what he has made. So thank God we have the greatest manual in all the world. This Bible right here really holds the greatest and all the keys for our psychology. And but the world would say in a nutshell just that, and it's very popular here in America, is self-care, like focus on self. And through the focus of self and the really just very deliberate and very intense and concentrated focus on you and your self life, that you will be able to manifest and navigate and get through things. In a way, kind of fix yourself. However, the Bible and the teaching of Jesus Christ and his life was radical, completely the opposite, and was asking us to focus only on him. And through him, we are being touched and our lives are changed and transformed. So the radical focus would come if it can, and when it does, and we know and have experienced this, that when we focus on Christ primarily as number one, right? Like we heard on our Sunday message, like this radical thought that the pastor said, Pastor Schaller, was like, I focus on the Lord and then my marriage. There was a different ordering there, which was radical. So those two things, and I think the verse that comes to mind for me this morning was in Matthew 11, where Jesus said in verse 28, come to me, come to me. So in this program and in this week, we are asking you guys, all of us, that we would go to Christ. And through this, I think we have a great outline today. The outline is really going to be, there's a little bit of statistics that we've prepared, right, Meg, Liz? And then we've also brought in some protective measures or protective indicators help navigating. And Megan's we're just gonna turn it over to Megan. And then the last part is kind of also just a little bit of like resources, books, things that we're drawing from that all of us can really benefit from.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you think about theology and mental health, I think it's like this is where the rubber meets the road. Like what we believe about God is so important. It's so foundational to what we believe about ourselves. And so like you said, we can't begin with ourselves, but we have to begin with God, who he is, and then who he says that we are.
Yeah.
And when we talk about our kids, like so much of, I think, our responsibility is exactly that. Teaching them who God is and who they are in him, who he says that they are. And that is absolutely foundational to giving our kids a good chance at navigating life and their mental health, having good mental health throughout their lives. So we did gather some statistics. I think, we don't want to spend too much time painting the dark picture that is the mental health crisis right now. I think most people are aware of it.
Yes.
But, specific to kids, I thought, look, let's just at least take a minute to recognize that this is something worth our time and our prayer and our intentional consideration as parents. So in that sense, I don't want to spend too much time. Like Roger was like, this could get a little dark if you just really linger on these statistics. But at the same time, like we live in a dark world and these are real dangers. So just to give, I just did a little bit of digging. Meg, feel free to chime in these statistics also, because you have real life experience. You're counseling teenagers and families. So some of the most common issues, and this is the CDC listed these as the most common mental health issues that they see in kids, are anxiety, ADHD and other like behavior problems, and then depression. So those are the big ones. And underneath those categories, like within anxiety, you could also include things like OCD, PTSD coming from trauma, social anxiety. Those all fall within that. So 32% of 13 to 8-year-old kids suffer from some kind of anxiety disorder. That is high, 32%. And again, that includes a lot of different anxiety disorders. And also very sad to hear that because of the pandemic, globally, anxiety has doubled in children. And we see now like 1 in 5 children struggle with anxiety. And you can understand why the pandemic and the isolation of that and the fear and all of those things could contribute to that.
I think it's interesting to think, like, why would a kid, a teenager, a young person struggle with anxiety? Why would they struggle with depression? Why would my child, why is my preteen, my teenager struggling? And some very practical things for parents to put their eyes on is one big one, believe it or not, is, and I've seen this with 2 of my people that I'm seeing right now, is overscheduled lifestyles.
Oh, man.
Like teenagers, they make their schedule so full. And when they're home, what are they doing? They're scrolling on the phone, talking to their friends, doing TikTok. So an overscheduled lifestyle is going to cause anxiety. So this is something for parents to see and to look for. Like, why is my child having panic attacks, anxiety? It could be as simple as like, put the brakes on.
Yeah.
Let's pump those
say
brakes.
Say no to some things.
Let's say no to some. Let's teach my child to say no to some things.
Yeah. We need to say no to things in order to teach our kids to say no to things. That's a whole.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's some, there's big things but that one I thought was like, that's an easy one for a parent to kind of be like, oh yeah. Like that's, but some other things that we can see here, I'm going to read, I can read a few here, but these are things that I've personally laid eyes on. Spiritual neglect. Well, that sounds pretty intense, right? But really, spiritual neglect is just the lack of allowing your child to see things through a spiritual lens. That's very easy to do. We get in the hustle and bustle of life, right? We don't. Here in this ministry, our children go to teen ministry. They do these things, but overall, church becomes a very lower part of a lifestyle in a home. Mm-hmm. So to like be aware that God teaching your child that children should receive spiritual instruction so they will put their faith in God and remember his faithfulness and not become unruly, stubborn, or rebellious. And that's very simple to do. Like it's a lifestyle that you can choose to live. Mm-hmm. Instability in the home. Liz mentioned this here on her list. In your marriage, if you're having instability in your marriage, that's going to it's going to reflect through your children. It absolutely is going to reflect through your children. Yeah. So to just be aware of that and take the time for your marriage and yourself. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because when we were first talking about this, Meg, I remember I put like, what is like preventative medicine?
Yes.
And it was, I think, a little bit of a naive moment for me, because you corrected me, because I'm like, how can I prevent my child from ever having any mental health problems? What are the things that we can do?
Let us know.
And you were like, gently, you were like, hey, so Liz, maybe not preventative, because actually what we should be doing is preparing and equipping our children for when these things come. Right. Not when, I mean, not if, but when is what you said. And I appreciated that correction because it really did shift my thinking. Mm-hmm. And when I was doing the research to look at these statistics, it again came up because they were presenting that, yes, there are risk factors. There are things that can trigger or encourage mental health problems. Things like trauma, bullying in school, divorce in your family, being exposed to some kind of violence or stressful things. All of those are what they call risk factors, meaning that the more of these risk factors you have, the more likely that you as a child and also as an adult are going to experience mental health problems. But there's also what they call protective factors. And I think that's what we want to talk about a lot today from a biblical perspective is how can we equip our children with shields and armor, like protective things that are going to, what the statistics show, actually lower the likelihood of having mental health problems come out in your child, and then also reduce the impact of the risk factors that will come. Yeah. Like we're not saying I can put my kid in a bubble and that's how I'm gonna keep them safe and prevent these things from happening. But instead it's like, let's equip them. So I think that's really what we're hoping to do today.
Yeah, I mean, it's said that there's a fine balance in between those 2 points. A parent that shelters their child too much and the parent that lets their child go off and like, let's let them experience whatever. On both ends, you're going to see a peak in mental health. Believe it or not, even the sheltered child, you're going to see a peak in mental health. And on this side, it's a fine balance. It's road of understanding what your child is going through. Yeah. It's like meeting them where they're at, So to find that road in between both of those is the Lord's help. It's like 100% the Lord. Yeah. And then there's also, quickly I want to touch on, there's also the piece of parents aren't always able to predict what their child is going to choose. Yeah. Like we can do all the things. Yep. We can make all the steps that we need to do. We can do the research. But it was interesting. Someone had said to me once, like, we are the children of God. He is our Father, and He is the perfect Father. But do we do everything our perfect Father tells us to do?
Yeah.
No. Yeah. So there is that piece that it could be.
That's a good word.
That, that it could be that nature exceeds nurture. Right?
Meaning that even if you do all these things and you've got things we're going to go over, it's still possible that your child could suffer from depression. Yes. It's still possible that they could have crippling anxiety that you have to work through.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a good word.
And that's directly towards parents, right? Let's talk to ourselves. And so maybe we could say how tightly do we hold to these children versus how tightly do we hold to something else?
Exactly, yeah.
And how much, Lord, like you said, give us that balance, that in between. And so why don't you, Meg, as you think about that, what are some of the things, best practices, and as you think about these protective factors, what really brings the likelihood or the impact or the reduction of some of these health issues that we see?
Yeah.
Loaded question.
Loaded question. I know. So
Just throwing it right at you.
We weren't just going to have you on here to just throw you easy
this isn't
softballs,
softball.
Meg.
So as parents, so let me hear the question. So as parents, what are some protective factors that we can implement to our children?
Yes.
Yeah, that you see, like, you know, just practically and in your experience.
Well, overall, let me just see here. There's something that's on my mind, but I want to read because, so it's proven and it's known that a child needs security, love, discipline, self-esteem, acceptance, and awareness of God's presence. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we can throw our child out into the world, a Christian school, a church service, a teen group, and we can say, oh, they'll get all that out there. Sure, they may, but what level of it are they getting? What type of acceptance are they getting? What type of self-esteem building is happening? Wow. Yeah. What type of awareness of God's presence? You know, of course, there's a level of trust. We just talked about the shelter piece. There's a level of trust, but also the Bible does instruct us in Deuteronomy 11:19 and in other places that we are to talk to our children in the home, and we are to instruct our children in the ways of the Lord.
That's good.
Like that's my job. That's my job, along with the other people around us, the church groups, the youth groups. That's a supplementary, and that's very much needed as well. But we are to be the ones that give the security.
They supplement the home.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
That we're to give the security, the love, the discipline, the self-esteem, the acceptance, and the awareness of God's presence to our child. Yeah. That's my job. And to teach always. So it's not just like, okay, we had a devotional this week. To me, I don't even think it's necessarily a devotional. Yeah. It's like as we're walking with God as a family, we're bringing our child on that walk. Yep. Like yesterday we went to, my 11-year-old hates going to church. Let me be transparent. He does not like going to church. He doesn't understand why we go to church.
I literally had the same conversation with my 12-year-old. Go on.
And I'm like, how do you say that? Like, well, it's because it's what we do. It's because
how do you present
it's
that?
Tricky, right? Yeah. It's tricky. I want him to love church. I want him to understand. So yesterday we went to Fed Hill. We typically come here to Baltimore, but we went to Fed Hill. And Pastor Justin preached on the unity of the body of Christ and the importance of one member and how every member is needed. And in order for the Spirit of Christ to shine through the body of Christ, every member is needed. Yeah. Every member. The unity is needed. So my son was sitting next to me. He didn't want to go to children's ministry. So after I asked him, hey, did you hear that message? And he shared with me a little bit. Pastor Justin used a Lego piece as an example. If you have a Lego piece that's sitting by itself, it has no meaning. But if you put it with the Legos, it now has meaning. So,
that's amazing. You used a Lego on the day that your son
yes, is in there. Is in there.
Crazy.
So of course my son brings that up, and I'm like, yeah, and guess what? You're a Lego piece in the body of Christ, and that's why we go to church. Because you, not just mommy and daddy, but you, right down to your 3-year-old sister, are that important to the body of Christ. Yes.
So I love that because it's also outward. It's giving your son a sense that he's part of something outside of himself. It's not just how it makes you feel or how you feel about it, but that you're part of something. Yes. You have something to offer others.
Exactly.
Man, that's like so good for kids, right?
Yeah. So see that? So the instruction came from the pulpit, right? But then I, as a parent, took that opportunity to teach him within the home. Yeah. So I think that's how we can provide these things for our children. That's one example of, I don't know, do you guys have any examples?
Well, I just think about that, that little family dynamic is you guys are the little pastors and shepherds of these little flock.
Yes.
And, it doesn't always make sense. The shepherd, we hear his voice, but we're not always convinced this is the way we should go.
Yeah.
And then it's we need to hear it again. Yeah. And that's I thought about Psalm 62:10. It says once I heard but twice it was spoken.
Yeah.
Like we have to trust in the system in a way. I mean, I don't want to say system, but
don't
like
you think we kind of have to
process.
We have to like win our kids over to recognize that when you talk about discipline, you talk about boundaries and structure, that, okay, and I've said this often to our most disagreeable child, that you don't have to agree with me, but do you understand why I'm doing it? And if she's like, no, I don't get it at all, then I will take the time to basically show the heart behind the rule. And I think that that's something my parents did well that I'm thankful for, is that even though we lived in a strict home with rules and boundaries, that if you broke them, there were consequences. At the same time, I understood the heart behind those. They weren't arbitrary. You know, there wasn't a lot of like, because I said so, you know, there was more like, and I just had this conversation with one of my kids because I had to hold a boundary that I super duper didn't want to because it was very inconvenient. We ended up having to go home. And do you remember this? So I said, you know, if you can't listen to what I want you to do right now, and I'm recognizing you need some space, if you don't want to do that, we're going to have to go home. So your option is you can sit with me quietly when we're out, and then you can play later, but you need to calm down, or we can go home. And those two options were unacceptable to her. She did not prefer either of those. And so I had to continue to explain it to her and hold the line. And we ended up having to go home, and we missed out on a great night out with people. But by the end of it, I was like, I know you didn't agree with me, but do you understand why I did it? And at the beginning, it was like, no. It was like, she was yelling all kinds of things at me. You hate me. You want to ruin my life. I mean, really just went with it. And then by the end, we had this very like tender moment where she was like, I understand. And we snuggled. And I said, I want your best. Like, I want the best for you. Do you see that? And even if you don't agree, do you see it? And I think I don't always do that well, but I think the fact that I actually I actually went home.
Yes.
Right? Because how many times we're like, we're going to turn this car around if you don't. But are we really turning the car around? No, we're not. We're still going to the grocery store because I need to get eggs. You know?
The empty threats,
But when you follow through, but also like, isn't it important to give them that sense of your heart behind it, so that even if they don't agree, first of all, you're stable. Right? Because we were talking about this, that having a stable home with boundaries, and then maybe we could talk about what you were saying about in Galatians about the truth in love, because doesn't that go really well with this?
Ephesians 4.
Ephesians 4, but just to touch on what you just said, like, well done, Liz. Really,
thanks, Meg.
Because that's like
I wasn't there for it.
Let's go.
He
was like, just come.
Just riding the coattails of that parenting experience.
But really, because I want to talk about that for a second, because excuse me, how many times have you as a parent, allergies, sorry guys. How many times have you as a parent had your child say to you, I hate you, you don't love me? And like, we as parents can dissolve. We're like, what am I doing to my child?
Right.
Right? But that's something that I want to point out real quick. Like, that is a very common impulse that a child acts in the moment, and actually it's because their brains aren't yet mature to do anything different than that. Okay, so let's use the example. Your story was excellent. My 3-year-old wants a purple popsicle. She opens up the freezer. I get her a popsicle. It's pink. She starts flipping out. She's screaming, she's having a tantrum, and I'm like, what is wrong with this child? And I'm standing there, and I'm like, look, there's no purple. Pulling out all the popsicles, there's no purple. She's not getting it. She's not getting it, and guess what? She won't get it, because she's not mature enough in her brain to say, oh, Mom, well, there's no purples then. Okay, well, pink it is.
Easy enough.
Right? It's not there. So that's the same. They grow, and so your older child is older than 3, so she has more ability. If you said to your older child, your 12, 11, whatever age she is, no, there's no purple, should be okay, right? Maybe.
Hopefully.
Maybe.
Depending.
But I say that to say, what you did, Liz, like, you set the boundary. You didn't get fearful, if you may, at the fact that your child was shooting outbursts of emotions at you. She was shooting like painful feelings and impulses out at you, which is actually all she could do in that moment. Right. But you said, no, this is what we're doing. We're going to go home. And then I don't know, maybe you took your time, maybe she took her time, but then you brought her after she calmed down to a place of logic. Now that's a big piece.
Yeah.
When your child is having an outburst or an impulse or a tantrum or whatever you want to call it, when that child is in that, let it be.
Yeah.
Let it be.
Why didn't I learn that earlier, though?
Right?
Somebody hear that early.
Let it be.
Let it be. Just let it be. Like take them away. The consequence stands. Don't give them their way. Like you did what you did. But then like, what if you
don't
just
have to meet their volume or their level of emotion.
No, don't meet them, but just let it be.
Yeah.
And then tell them to scream in a pillow, give them a hug, nurture them however you can in that moment. Do not punish them in that moment. The consequence was good, you stood with it. But then after the fact, like adding logic to what happened, right? The logic. And so then what are we doing when we're doing that? We're adding from the emotional sphere of the brain to the cognitive sphere, the logical sphere. There's not a bridge yet made from one to the other in a child.
Yeah.
Like there's scientific research done on this, okay, if you want to look it up.
Yeah.
But now you're helping build that in a healthy way.
Wow, what an honor. What a privilege.
An honor,
Right.
And then you can
It doesn't feel like
it.
an honor in the moment.
It doesn't.
It does not.
doesn't.
But it is.
But it is.
It is.
It's an opportunity. Yeah.
And that can roll into what you just asked, Liz.
Yeah.
Like, so in Ephesians 4:14, that we henceforth be no more children tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine by the sleight of men and cunning craftiness whereby they lie in wait to deceive. So that's what our children are experiencing. Our children are not cognitively able to take on what the world is putting at them. They aren't. Like, embrace it. Like our children, why don't you want your 9-year-old to have a phone? She or he is not cognitively able to take what that phone is going to put at them. They're not. Like, parents might not want to hear this, but that is the truth. So what's going to happen? They're going to get carried about with every wind of doctrine. They're going to be pulled back and forth. Mom's telling me this at home, but my friend's telling me this on the phone.
Yeah.
And
Who do I trust?
Who do I trust? What do I do? And now they're just this ball of emotion that's floating back and forth. And they're easily deceived, right? At this point, they're easily deceived.
Yeah, it's like a gullible nature.
Yeah.
And don't you think like there's two parts to this? It's one that I'm recognizing that they don't have those bridges yet, right? And then there's the other part is that, like we were just saying a minute ago, that I can build the bridge.
Yes.
So like recognizing it's its own thing. Like, don't you get it? Like how many times we're like, I've said it 100 times. I mean, do I say it in another language now? Like, where do I go with this? Okay, that's the big news flash, so to speak. Like, they don't. Okay, just accept that, and then also let's turn the corner here, and let as the shepherds and little leaders of this flock, I can initiate and build little bridges.
Exactly.
So
you're teaching. You're doing what Deuteronomy is telling you to do.
Right.
You're teaching your children.
Yeah.
Right. And this is all preventative to mental health.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
This is all. And then in verse 15 it says, "But speaking the truth in love."
Yeah.
May grow up into him all things, which is the head, even Christ. So now you're leading them to Christ.
Right.
It's like that's the end goal is that they would say one day that they're no longer children tossed to and fro.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's because they had people in their lives, moms or dads or other caregivers or other people who are speaking the truth in love.
Yes.
Like that is like a beautiful and maybe most succinct way of looking at what it is to be biblically parenting and discipling children.
Right, because I think that's the word.
The goal is they go out into the world,
Right.
and they're able to navigate life.
Yep.
Because I think the fact is that, and when you had said this when we were talking and prepping, that anxiety, depression, lacking self-control, having addictions. These are things that we're going to be faced with, and our kids will be faced with these things. And we don't want to just avoid those things.
That's
we
right.
don't want to just isolate our children, but we want to prepare them to be able to navigate through those things. because I was just talking about one of my other kids who has a little bit more of a struggle with worry, that the current worry is about something, feeling safe in our home. And I was saying to Raj, I'm like, yeah, we could like get 3 more bolts on our door. We could have, massive security cameras. We could get a terrifying dog.
Yes.
We could have all of these things so that I could quell her fears with those things. But that won't equip her for the next thing she's going to worry about, which could be, succeeding or failing at school or, like whatever the thing might be that has nothing to do with the security in our home.
Right.
So it's really so much about their hearts and not the external things. Yes, we want a safe home.
Of course.
But it can't be that we're just throwing, Band-Aids on things when really we could be giving them like tools so that they can fight.
Yeah.
Right. I think tools is the word, right? Like,
yeah. And like, I want to say weapons because I feel like it's a fight.
It is a fight.
Right?
It is a fight. Like the world, like this is the first time that parents have raised kids in where we're at, right?
yes.
Like a digital age.
Yeah.
Like my kid can like be with a friend and see something on a phone and I'll never know about it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then that can instigate worry, that can cause worry, there's so many different things out there. So you're right.
And
like
it's hidden.
Get the sword.
It's hidden, so that's why it calls for an aggressive nature, a more like very exact pinpoint, almost aggressive.
And because it's hidden, that's where shame comes in, right?
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. That was a great.
Yeah. We wanted to make there's like a whole section that we want to talk about that's really just thinking about emotions versus like thoughts and the mind.
Yeah.
Right? And that is massive. People have written whole books about it. So we don't have that much time left on this show, but I think this is huge because I can't even think of the number of times that I've applied this in different ways with my own kids. And now we're getting into those preteen and teenage, and it's just becoming more and more important and real to be able to talk through the difference between these two things. And we already talked about, we don't want to shut down conversations about emotions, right? So let's think about this. We have emotions. Pastor Schaller just preached a message yesterday, and it was awesome because he made it clear that our feelings cannot trump truth. Okay?
They can't be in the driver's seat.
They can't be in the driver's seat.
They shouldn't be in the driver's seat.
And what we're talking about here is, okay, our kids are going to have feelings. I mean, what an understatement. We all have feelings.
Yeah,
kids have feelings, but their feelings can be like really irrational. As you get older, you could maybe get a little bit, your emotions maybe could be more rational. But I have found that not to be true for me. I mean, I have struggled with travel anxiety, and it doesn't make any sense. Like, I've got everything lined up, everything's good to go, and my body's just like, I don't believe you, it doesn't matter. I'm still going to be anxious. So we got to recognize that feelings are very real. They affect our physical bodies. If those listening have had the luxury of never having that happen to them, that's great. But most of us, we have experienced where emotions have affected our physical bodies. And mental health disorders very much play into that, where you can't sleep, gastrointestinal problems of all kinds. They're physical ailments that come from the way you deal with your emotions and your mind. So we can't like downplay that emotions are powerful, but we can help our kids understand the difference between emotions and thoughts. And not to, like you were saying, Meg, that in the world today, the word anxiety is like this really, it's a powerful word, and we're really afraid of it. And you were like, why are we afraid of anxiety? It is an indicator. We need to listen, right? Can you say something about that?
Yeah, so that's a slice of the pie of anxiety, but it's a slice that needs to be educated to people. A lot of the anxiety that young people experience is actually a way to protect them.
Yeah.
If you are having anxiety about going with a friend, like that's maybe your anxiety speaking to you that I shouldn't go with that friend. If you're having anxiety about watching a movie, maybe that's an indicator the anxiety speaking to you. So if you're having anxiety because you're not being responsible to study for a test because you're scrolling TikTok for hours, that maybe is your anxiety saying to you, put the phone down and study for your test.
Yeah.
So like to think about it from that angle. And it's interesting because when I spoke to the Pink Chapel here at our high school, to the girls, I spoke about this and I talked to the basketball team and I asked them, I said, how many of you guys, when you're in practice with Coach Jen, how many of you guys is she working you hard? Oh yeah, she's working us hard. Now, is she preparing you for something? Yes, she's preparing us for the games, for the season, for the championship, which by the way, they won. Congratulations.
Ooh, congrats.
But I said to them, when you get out on the court, do you have anxiety? Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's like a bodily response to something that is going, like you're prepared for it. You've been pushed, you've been conditioned, you've been ready for it. Like you with your flying anxiety, you're prepared for it. You know it, you're pushing for it, you're ready for it, but you're still flying.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're still playing the game, right? So it's anxiety can be looked at as like okay, let's avoid. I can't do this. Avoidance.
Right. Don't fly. Don't play basketball.
Correct.
Right.
Avoidance feeds anxiety. Remember that. Avoidance feeds anxiety. When your child is worrying or having anxiety, and if you allow them to avoid the thing that they're having anxiety in, you're feeding their anxiety. Remember that.
Okay.
Now, there are anxiety disorders, and that is something that should be addressed by a professional, in my opinion. And that's not what we're talking about today.
Yeah.
That is not. I want to make that very clear. And I'm very aware of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a piece. And feelings, to touch on feelings when it comes to children, I want to keep our minds on children. I'm not speaking about adults here. I'm sharing about children. Children, feelings are very important to us as parents and for them as children to be able to express to us because they are indicators.
Yeah.
They are indicators for us to help to build that bridge. If we shame our child in expressing a feeling, they're never going to express that feeling to us again.
Yeah.
And then they're going to push it down. And then they're not going to be able to share that. And then they're going to have anxiety. And then they're going to have depression.
Yeah.
Because they have a feeling, they have something that has happened to them. I was rejected at school. I mean, you can fill in the blanks. Like it could,
So many
it could be
things.
small, it could be huge, right?
I was not included in this.
Yeah.
I missed that.
Yeah. Yeah. I
fell short.
failed.
Well, it's not a big deal you weren't included in that. What's the big deal? You played with those other friends. No.
Right.
It was a big deal to your child.
Yeah.
It was a
Yeah.
big deal. Now, is there truth to put to that? Sure. But beware, I speak to myself too, because I have 4 children and it gets hard. Beware that when your child is expressing something, that you take the time to stop and listen and validate, and then you can help them apply the truth. If you don't take that time to stop and listen and validate, guess what? Your relationship is being severed.
Okay.
And that's not a place that you want to be.
I feel like that is a really, really like simple shift that we can do, because what I'm hearing you say is my kid comes to me and he says, I'm afraid of the dark.
Yeah.
Okay. And I could be like, that's ridiculous.
Yes.
There's nothing to be afraid of. Get a
such thing
grip.
as monsters.
Go to bed.
Get back in bed, right?
And we've done it.
Totally done it. Yes. That's
100%.
on me. But in what you're saying is I don't have to be like, yes, you should be afraid of the dark. I'm going to sit here and kind of wallow, because I think that's what people think when they say validate emotions. They're like, no, but that's not what we're saying.
It's swinging to the pendulum here. Like we got to find the balance.
Correct.
Yeah. But it's like you can be like, I can understand why you'd be afraid of the dark. Even you could say, you've said this to our kids, like, I used to be afraid of the dark.
Well, I wanted to say that one thing that I have learned, what little about not cutting off these bridges and because really like using that or allowing that shame to come in, or even being a part of that shame towards our children, it does cut off the communication and the trust, which is the exact opposite of what we want to do in the family home nucleus.
Correct.
We want to create the culture of like truth sharing and transparency and sharing these.
Yes.
And how can you share the truth
when
if
it's
you
getting
cut it
cut off
Correct.
with
Right.
shame.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you can still share it, but the kid will be like,
right,
yeah, right.
Exactly.
It might go completely over his head. Well, but there's certain times when I feel like, at least in our home, we had times where they saw that dad was really stressed, and they acknowledged what was causing the stress. They could see it. And I think like that's a beautiful thing, not something that we should cover up and hide as moms and dads. Like instead of like being Supermans, as like my son would look at me as, but actually show him that I am also vulnerable, like I am humble.
Yes.
I don't know. And so in my case, it was just like, I just told him point blank, like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
I remember
And
that.
I
That was
remember
amazing.
saying like, we're going to have to pray together.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
And it was such a monumental shift in our structure of how we do things that dad would say, I'm going to seek the Lord.
Yes.
He's the real one who's going to be answering these problems. He's actually the one that's in the boat with us.
Yeah.
And that shift, I think, has allowed smaller bridges to be formed.
That's
so
amazing.
maybe as parents, we could consider being, I don't mean like vulnerable, like, oh, this is what happened to me when I was young, or like, this is what, like, all the things that are more adult
Sure.
versions
Oversharing.
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah.
However, like, I don't know. I just don't know. So can you pray with me?
Yeah.
You know, can you consider this with me? And I think that really is a powerful statement when it comes to the family culture.
Yeah.
And then they're the next one up. Hey, Dad, similar thing happened to me.
So we have a few resources here that go along with some of these things. Really, when it comes down to it, I just think the more we can convince our kids that they have the ability to think with God,
Yeah.
right? Like, yes, you have your emotions. I want to hear them. I recognize them, but I can also walk alongside you and what you said, give them truth.
Yeah.
And I think
Yes.
that
That's always
is
the key. Yeah.
that is the coolest thing I've seen with my kids is that we can experience emotions. They can be very strong. We can recognize them and say, I get why you feel that way. Wow, like there it is. Like you're afraid or you're angry or you're anxious, you're worried, whatever it might be. But then we also get the opportunity, because we don't shame them, because we are hearing them, to offer truth. And I think that shift from the emotions, like you said, Raj, aren't in the driver's seat. They're there, high emotion. Yes, you exist. You're in the car, but you're not driving this vehicle.
That's right.
You know? And when I was talking to you about this, that, you know, emotions are not very smart, so they don't make good leaders. That's what we say. I say that to my kids often. They can mislead you. And we can decide what we think about. Like, we get to choose what we think about.
Yeah.
And you were like, well, yeah, that's cognitive behavioral therapy. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh,
Yeah.
well, that's a cool
Well, yeah,
word.
let's
you
talk
know?
a little
So I
bit
wanna
about that. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what it means to like help a child think in truth.
Yeah, and
Yes.
create like pathways,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Exactly. So briefly, so basically it's just that. Like if a person thinks in a certain way in a negative thinking pattern, then their brain creates paths in a negative thinking pattern. So how do you reverse that? You decide to think in a positive thinking pattern. But you really have to dull it down for us beautiful creatures.
Yeah.
You can't just say, oh, okay, I'm just going to think in a positive thinking pattern.
Yeah.
You actually, like what we do in the counseling room actually is I point out what's the negative thinking pattern. The negative thinking pattern is mom and dad got divorced when I was 10 years old and they left me hanging. That's truth, right? It's truth, but what's that doing for her brain pattern, right? Okay, so now let's put a truth and a positive reflection, and then I have them tell me like a positive reflection, and we try to do it Bible-based because I'm a biblical counselor.
Yeah.
So it's like God works all things together for good, but I like them to decide it. And then they write it down. So then every time that thought comes in, they recite it out loud. So now you're changing that pattern of thinking. Like you're changing your brain patterns of thinking. And we want to encourage it to be based on the Bible. And I think Liz wrote Philippians 4.
Yeah. Philippians 4, 6 through 9.
Yeah, that's that right there. Boom.
It's so good. It's
Yeah.
like, it says, you know, whatsoever things are true, honorable, just, pure, lovely, commendable. If there's anything with excellence, anything worthy of praise, think about these things, what you have learned. And then it says in verse 9, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you. And the verse before in verse 7, it's my favorite because that's when it says, the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds.
There it is, yeah.
So that's one we talk to with our kids for sure. Like, and it says practice these things.
Yes,
because I think that it's hard for kids to get the concept that it takes practice to see results.
Yeah.
They don't. We all don't like that, let's be honest, but kids especially. The concept of like playing the long game, watering the garden every day because eventually there's going to be a tomato. Those are like things that kids need to be convinced of because they would much rather just eat a piece of candy and feel good.
Yeah.
Or, get to watch the show that can turn their brain off so they don't have to worry anymore because now they're thinking about something else. But the idea that practicing these things will guide your emotions to healthy, like they need to be convinced of that, and we need to walk alongside them, and we need to do it as well. Like we need to model it. The Psalms, like reading the Psalms, I just did that with one of our kids, and I picked one that was like super emotional, where David at the beginning is he's not well. He's like, this is terrible. Everything's bad. What am I going to do? And by the end of it, he's remembering the works of the Lord, and he's leading his mind to like green pastures, and now he's worshiping the Lord, and he's resting and trusting in God. And that is what we hope to equip our children to do in whatever situation when we're not there. Like that is the hope, right? That eventually they're going to be able to do this themselves. So we're pretty much out of time.
Yeah. Why don't we give Megan the last word here?
Yeah,
What would you like to say to parents and kids?
Yeah, so I would like to say that what we covered today is very good for preventative. What we've covered today, we're coming in from the top and we're giving tools. But I would like to say if your child is struggling with anxiety, behavioral issues, anything like this, seek help. There are counselors and excellent counselors, and I'm not plugging myself, but there are excellent counselors out there, and a child might just need to sit with somebody in order to unload some things. And it's very important to take your child's mental health seriously. If it's not working what we've discussed, and if you're listening and you're coming up short and you're like, I don't know, guys, like it sounds like all fluffy, but this is not where we're at in our home, that's okay. That's okay. And seek out help, and there is help out there. And additionally, there are different mental health disorders such as ADHD and ADD, and those are real things. Like, don't let anyone ever tell you, oh, ADD is not a thing. It's a real thing. Yeah. And it really needs like some structure to it, and it really needs some counseling to that. That's my very unsolicited opinion. And
it is solicited. Yeah. I mean, that's why we had you on here, because we know that there's going to be all different types of people listening. So I think it's important that we say that. Yes. And I think before we wrap up, let's just give a couple of these resources.
Oh, yes, please.
Because I think people like to hear them. The first one is Pastor Schaller, our pastor here in Baltimore, wrote a book. This is not the textbook version, but he teaches a class, Biblical Psychology. It was my favorite class. It's also online if you want to watch the classes. Yep. But he wrote a book. It's As the Soul Prospers. And it's a Christian view of human psychology. He talks about neural pathways and synaptic pruning, where you can redirect pathways. It's excellent, and I love that. This is just one example, but I listened to a podcast called Raising Boys and Girls, and it's by Sissy Goff, this author, as well as David Thomas, and they address both boys and girls. This is a workbook that I do with one of my daughters. It's a girl's guide to overcoming worry and anxiety. It's biblical. Awesome. It's written for children. I love it. And then do you want to just show those real quick?
Yeah, my well-used, this is the Whole Brain Child. This is a very, very great book goes in deeper at what we talked about today. This shares about how the child's thinking is not developed enough to be in the logical brain. They call it the logic brain. This is a very scientific book on the brain of the child and how to address it accordingly. This book has taught me so much with my 4 children, who all differ so greatly. This is Treading Boldly. Excellent book. We didn't get into pornography today, but pornography is a very real real thing, and it is running rampant in our society. And that is another thing that you can say to yourself. If you have a child and you're sitting there thinking they I'm not going to say they are not going to look at pornography someday, you need to wake up.
Yeah.
Because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when they're going to see pornography. And this book is an excellent book talking to parents and how to walk your child through when they see pornography.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah.
There's so many more resources. We're out of time.
Yeah.
This was awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Megan.
Yeah,
Thank you, Meg,
having
for
me.
being with us. And listeners, don't forget to subscribe to wherever you listen on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify. And don't forget to tune in tomorrow and all this week as we continue on this topic of mental health. Thanks for being here.